We are going to kind of back up a little before this class is really supposed to start, because this class is really supposed to be 1877 to yesterday is a modern period, but some of this overlaps a lot. So we're going to back up to like the early 1800s for one lecture and look at what was going on industrial-wise, because this is stuff that y'all haven't seen since 8th grade. And it could end up on a STAR test. And at this point, we don't know if y'all are even going to have a STAR test this year. It's up in the air as to what's going to happen, or if you have it, if it's going to count. We don't know. So we got to act like it's one you have to pass. We don't know if it will be or not. But that having been said, you will all pass it. Don't panic about it. My students don't fail it. Okay, it just doesn't happen. We always pass the test. So we're going to look at urbanization as seen in the late 19th and early 20th century. What's urbanization mean? Anybody?
It's like it's kind of like industrialization in a way, but like
Okay.
it's where people kind of go towards the city more than they do.
That's the key. Urban means city, and you're right. There's a lot of industrialism in this time period. So let's get these characteristics down. We're not going to write a lot on this. We're going to look at a lot of pictures on this. But here are the characteristics of urbanization during the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age is that time period, 1840s, 50s, 60s, when the rich were getting rich, but the poor were not getting any wealth. The poor were getting poorer. The time period of serious problems in working situations. Heavy immigration. In fact, we called it the Gilded Age because a guy named, man, my brain's not working right now. A guy named Mark Twain, y'all know who he is, right? Wrote Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. Mark Twain described this area as gilded because, y'all know what a gilded ring is? Anybody? If something is gilded, it means it's covered on the outside. Gilded, like gilded in gold, is a cheap ring that you bought your girlfriend and lied to her about. You went down and you bought a ring for $20. And you went, baby, I bought you this really nice gold ring because I love you forever and ever. And she wears it twice and the gold rubs off and it's got copper underneath it. Well, that's what he saw this time period as. On the outside, it was bright and shiny because the rich were getting rich. But you scratch that outside covering a little bit, it was crappy tin on the inside, and the common people weren't doing well, okay? It was a time period of megalopolises. A megalopolis is a giant city. It's a city that where everything is kind of growing together, okay? Think about cities like Dallas, Fort Worth. You go up there, and you don't think of Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, Grand Prairie, Irving. You don't think of those as different cities, do you? It's just the DFW Metroplex, right? Well, that's what a megalopolis is. It's where cities get so big that they just kind of run together. It's the first time we had mass transit in this country. That means streetcars at this time, for the most part. Cities were magnets for economic and social opportunities. It was the one place where if you were born poor, you might have stood a chance of digging your way out of that and becoming something wealthy. Because there were jobs available to you. And that's kind of a big deal. There were extreme class distinctions. You had an inner core and an outer core. The rich would live in one part of town, and the poor lived in another. Do we still do that?
Yes.
A lot of times we did, right? Not so much in rural America, but if you go through your big cities, you can really quickly tell where the rich live and where the poor live, right? It's the only place women had any opportunity. We don't often think of women as having a lot of opportunity, but here they could go out and get a job and earn some money. guys, if any of you have jobs, you know real quick, as soon as you start making a little bit of money, you get a little more privileges at home because suddenly you ain't spending mom and dad's money, you're spending your money. Well, parents are the same way, or women were the same way. When they could get jobs and start bringing money in, they had more value to the marriage, and women got more rights. They still didn't have equal rights, but they had more rights. They're not going to get the vote until 1920. The good old days, right? That's a terrible thing to say. You know, women outnumber men. There are more women in America than there are men. And they still can't get a chick elected president. I don't understand it. I don't get it. There's a lot of bad living conditions in this area. It says squalid living conditions. People were living in horrible, horrible systems. Tenement houses where there were frequently 4 or 5 families sharing one bathroom. Really, really rough. I don't even want to share a bathroom with somebody else in my own family, you know, and these are whole families sharing one. It's a time period of large political machines. A political machine is where you organize people to get someone elected. Oh, God. They're still used today. It's really effective. And neighborhoods tended to be ethnic. That means that you tended to live in a neighborhood with everybody else at the same race as you. You had Chinatown, and Little Italy, and Little Ireland, and the black part of town, and the white part of town. Everybody had their own little ethnic community. And they kept their own religion, and they kept their own language, and their own restaurants. We don't do that so much anymore.
Still have Chinatown.
We still have Chinatown, but it's a lot smaller than it used to be.
And some good food.
There's one in Houston, although it's not as big as it used to be. So we think of the city as a new frontier. You don't have to write this part down. Because a lot of stuff was happening in cities that was pretty cool. There was a lot of new architectural style. We were learning how to use space better, building things like large parks. You go to New York Central Park is something that was built in this time period. And it's phenomenal if you ever get to go. There's an energy to these cities. The cities were melting pots where all these different immigrants could come and they would kind of mix together and we would start to learn about each other's language and each other's food. They're still not living together for the most part, but it was kind of cool. Crime is out of control at this time period. This thing keeps getting stuck on me.
What really big gangsters were around that time?
Well, it wasn't so much gangsters at this time as it was illegal alcohol was being produced, bathtub gin was being produced, speakeasies, illegal bars were all over the place, prostitution was big, gambling was everywhere, but it wasn't really gangsters yet.
Mafia?
That's going to be a little later on. Mafia is going to be born whenever alcohol becomes illegal, and they're going to be born out of bootlegging whiskey out of Canada. All right, let's look at a couple of these key cities. The first place we call the second city. New York is America's first city. Chicago's the second city, okay? Sometimes called the Windy City, located on the Great Lakes. It's going to be the place where the modern skyscraper is invented. This guy, William Jenney, is going to invent the modern skyscraper. And this was the first one, the Central YMCA in Chicago. I'm going to turn this other light off. It's going to mess up my camera, which y'all will be able to see a little better. So whoever's watching this is just going to have to deal with it.
You're going to watch me cough?
This is the Central YMCA building. Now, would we think of this as a skyscraper today? No, probably not. That's probably a 10, 12-story building. But it was clearly the largest building that had ever been built at that time period. This guy, Louis Sullivan, is an absolute genius. He lives until 1924, and he believes that buildings should be pieces of art. His famous statement is form follows function. What that means is you figure out what you need your building to do, and then you build the building specifically for that purpose, instead of just building a great big building and seeing what you could shove into it, okay? And he had some amazing buildings. You've probably seen some of them before. This is the Bayern Building. I think this is pretty cool, all the architectural style up there at the top. This was in 1897. This is a department store. This looks very, very modern. This was 1899. But you wouldn't think this building was built in the 1800s, would you? It looks very, very modern. He was believed to be an extremely modern guy. We'll look at some of his houses later on. This is D.H. Burnham. Burnham is the first person to use steel as a superstructure. So to build a steel structure that you could build much higher. And then you would put your bricks and all around it. That will allow you to build stronger buildings that go much, much higher. This is an apartment building in Chicago that he built. Now, would you call that a skyscraper?
To a degree.
I think I probably would at this point. It's a pretty unique shaped building.
I wouldn't want to take the stairs.
No. This is the Marshall Fields building. Most of these are not around anymore. The Railway Exchange. What do you notice about all these, though?
They're the same design.
They're all real blocky, right?
Yeah.
That was kind of the style of the time. Anybody heard of this guy, Frank Lloyd Wright?
I've kind of heard the name.
He's America's most famous architect and designer. He's usually considered to be the greatest architect in American history. And he built some gorgeous buildings. He lives till 1959. He calls his school of architecture the Prairie House, where he wanted all of his art, his architecture, to be kind of built around, inspired by nature, okay? He called it organic architecture. My computer is absolutely possessed today. And it's not wanting to do anything, and I don't know why. All right, there we go. This is the Allen Lamb House, pretty famous building. Now, we've seen buildings like, you can go around and see buildings that look similar to this, that were built in the 1950s, all over the place. But he was the first person to do this. And it's a very organic, natural-looking style of architecture. This is Hollyhock House. You've probably seen this in a million movies in Los Angeles. They film a lot of movies of this. Anybody ever seen the Lethal Weapon movies? Mm-hmm. This is the place where the counterfeiters are that they execute everybody, is this house. Pretty famous building. It always looked like a funeral parlor to me, but you know, whatever. Pretty famous. Falling Waters, another famous house we've seen in 1,000 movies. Anybody seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off?
Oh yeah.
This is the house that the kid lived in, but they drove the Corvette off the wall.
Oh.
They filmed that here. Frank Lloyd Wright's house, Falling Waters, in 1936. This river actually flows through the house, all the way through it. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
This is the inside of Falling Waters. The inside is what I like to refer to by the technical term, but ugly, okay? But it was very 1950s, 60s look. It looks like it could be in an Austin Powers movie, okay, or an old James Bond movie. It's got that kind of feel to it, but it's very dated, right? Frank Lloyd Wright also made furniture. Anybody like any of this stuff?
No.
This
This
is
is that chair at the bottom right.
This is American style furniture. This was very, very big in the 1950s. Your grandparents or great grandparents probably had some furniture like this. He had the windows to his house made himself. He built it all himself. And they were built on what we call a prairie wheat pattern. If you look in there, can you see the wheat pattern in here?
Mm-hmm.
Again, he's looking at nature for an influence. Kind of cool stuff. This is the Johnson Wax Building. It's in Racine, Wisconsin. Johnson & Johnson. He built this great big building. Remember, that was a wax and a paint company. Now look at the building. Can you tell what he was inspired by?
Paint.
It looks like paint pouring, doesn't it? He called it his lily pad house. It looked like lily pads to him. But I think it's interesting. He built the most famous museum in the world, the Guggenheim. If you ever get to go to New York City, it's an absolutely awesome museum.
What's in it?
It's an art museum. It's fine art.
Okay.
But it's a circular pattern, and you walk, you just walk all the way around it, all the way up and down like a corkscrew. It's pretty amazing.
What famous stuff does it have in there?
It's got rotating stock. It doesn't have a set things that are there all the time.
Oh, okay.
New York City had its own style. They called New York City Gotham because it was much darker. It wasn't nearly as innovative. But I like their stuff. Think about Batman movies. What's Gotham City? What do you think of? You think of the tall buildings with dark spires.
Carnivals.
Does that look like it would belong in Gotham City?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, right? It's a different style of art than we saw in Chicago. I like it better. This is the Western Union Building. The Manhattan Life Insurance Building in New York City. This still stands. I saw that when I was in New York a couple of years ago. The Singer Building. Looks like an old bell tower, doesn't it? The Woolworth Building was at one point the tallest building in the world before the Empire State Building was built.
You got torn down?
Oh, it's still there. It's just not the tallest anymore.
Oh.
The Flatiron Building, you've seen this in a million movies. This building is pretty cool to see. It's called the Flatiron Building because it's shaped like an iron. It's a triangle. But the way it's built, it's so narrow that it looks like it's just one wall if you catch the side of it that was standing there. It's really a triangle. It's just how it's built.
Why did they build it like that?
Because they thought it was pretty. And it's on a really narrow spot. The road cuts up there in these angles, and they just built right up to the road.
Don't look very sturdy.
It is. Grand Central Station. This is the central hub of the transportation in New York. The Brooklyn Bridge, when it was built, it was considered to be the greatest architectural accomplishment of all time. Nobody thought they could build a bridge over Brooklyn Bay. It was too big. I can't remember the guy's name that built it now. Raymond. But the nickname of this, guys, y'all are going to think it's funny, but it's very, very crass. They called it Raymond's Great Erection because he was erecting a big building. So this was Raymond's erection.
That's what I'm calling it.
Kind of funny. If you go on the New York trip with us, I don't know if any of you are thinking about doing it, but we walk across this bridge. It's absolutely awesome to do. The Statue of Liberty, built by Frederick Bartholdi. The Statue of Liberty is actually built with an entire steel infrastructure, just like skyscrapers are, and then they drop the copper frame around it. This was given to us by the government of France, built by Bartholdi. Interestingly enough, the people of New York really didn't want it. They had it forced on them by the president, President Grant. But they really didn't want it. They had to pay to build the island and build the monument to the pedestal to set it on.
So why did France give it to us?
They actually didn't want to give it to us first. They tried to give it to Egypt. Egypt wouldn't take it, so they gave it to us as friendship. Their revolution was inspired by our revolution. This is, y'all heard of Kinnaman Apartments or Dumbbell Apartments. This was common in New York. Most of your apartments were built like this. Can you see why they're called dumbbells?
Yeah.
They're buildings that look like dumbbells stacked on top of each other. And they would have this common area between the buildings. This is like a grassy area that people could go out, but grass wouldn't grow because it's too narrow, there's no sun, the buildings are too tall, and it ends up being a place where disease ends up gathering. And it's very, very dangerous. If you look at this, each one of these would be laid out the same, but this is one family over here. Has a parlor, living room, 2 bedrooms. Another parlor, living room, 2 bedrooms. Here's the bathroom for all these people. Here's the bathroom for all these people. Okay? You go outside and go to that bathroom. It's not a healthy place. These places were incredibly, incredibly dangerous. Disease spread very, very quickly.
COVID-19.
Some of them still stand. You cannot build new ones but you can maintain old ones. Here's a Dumbbell Apartment in New York if you wanted to see what they look like. This guy, Jacob Riis, in 1890, went out to write about how the poor lived in New York, and he took photos. And this is what life was like for the poor in New York. Pictures of tenement living. These are the kind of houses they lived in. This is the inside of a tenement. Just out of curiosity, how many people can you see living in there?
At least
1,
8.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can count 6 just in a quick glance.
That's disgusting.
And there could be more than that, okay? And that's in one bedroom in a tenement, okay? This is how people lived. This is a family that probably lived in one room. All these people. I count 7 right there. This is an immigrant family doing what they call rag picking, where they would go around and they would gather up just loose rags they could find, and they would sew them into blankets or clothes and then sell them for extra money. Mulberry Street was kind of the center of the slums of New York, and the people did their business in the street. They're out here buying and selling their goods right in the middle of the street. That kind of looks cool to me. St. Patrick's Cathedral still stands in New York. Take a trip with us when we go to that. It's right across from Trump Tower. But it was the first big cathedral in New York, the big Christian church.
Trump Tower in New York.
We did last time. Hester Street's the Jewish part of town. Looks a lot different, doesn't it? Very, very poor.
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah is a Jewish holiday, and this is a greeting card for it. This is what Chinatown looked like in New York. Pell Street. Chinatown's still there in New York. You don't want to go there after dark. It's kind of dangerous. I'm skipping some of this. All right. So that gets us through this section. Y'all have a quizzes up on your classroom. I believe it's still open. If you owe me anything, now's a good time to get it done, okay?
Just a